A little 50 Shades of Grey fanfic storyline. The movie opens up with a woman narrating the story, saying how old and decrepit she turned once she hit 18 years old. She wishes she's 15 again. Talk about a distorted viewpoint, as I'm about to turn 85 myself. Jane hails from a French lineage, residing in a secluded village within Vietnam. Her mother serves as an educator at the local school. Among her siblings, Pierre is the eldest, followed by the younger, Paul. Financially, their status is modest when compared to other French families, yet they hold a more privileged position than the village locals. Pierre assumes the role of family patriarch, frequently intimidating his siblings. Pierre seems to embody the ugly duckling archetype, which perhaps explains his domineering behavior. Paul harbors a deep-seated fear of Pierre, often reacting with noticeable timidity. Despite being aware, their mother remains passive, witnessing Paul endure Pierre's harassment without intervention. Later in their bedroom, Jane says that her mother doesn't care about her and Paul, and she only loves Pierre. She doesn't believe it when her mother says that she loves them equally. Her mother then reveals that she plans to send Pierre back to France because she can no longer deal with his opium addiction. Despite being the eldest and acting as the family head, Pierre is useless. Hey, that sounds like me. He doesn't have a job, and even steals money from his mother to buy opium. On the other hand, Jane studies in Saigon and only stays with her family during vacation. Jane must now return to Saigon since it's the last day of her vacation. Her mother sends her off, and even gives her money for the trip. Later on, a car that belongs to a rich man boards the ferry before it leaves. That car might as well be a white van. The wealthy Chinese man Tony's inside the car and sees Jane relaxing, so he decides to step out and talk to her. He approaches her and asks if she wants some cigarettes. She says no to lung cancer. Tony tries to spark a conversation again, but Jane is a brick wall. He decides to give it another go, this time complimenting her beautiful looks. She replies this time around, and they begin to talk. Tony says that he just finished his business studies, and he's coming home from Paris. Learning that Jane is bound for Saigon, he offers her a ride in his white van. She accepts the man's offer, and they both leave the port in his car. In the car, Tony asks about Jane's age. She lies and tells him that she's 17. The gentleman reveals to her that he is 32 years of age, underscoring the importance of carrying a driver's license for verification. Their exchange blossoms into more in-depth conversations. As time progresses, Tony begins to gently touch Jane's fingers. Sensing her comfort, he escalates to clasping her hands. By the time they reach Saigon, Tony's hand has subtly made its way to her thighs. Upon arrival, Jane departs the vehicle, bidding farewell before she steps into her boarding house. Later that night, she talks to her only friend in school, who also happens to be the only other white girl. She tells her about the Chinese man that she met earlier. Later, Jane and her friend talk about being female escorts in bed while Jane caresses her. The next day, Jane sees Tony's car on her way to school. Believing that he's there to see her, she approaches it. She then kisses the car's window to seduce Tony before running back to school. Can you imagine doing this today on a tinted window, and it's not the right car? After school is over, Jane looks around for Tony's car, but doesn't find it. She walks to her boarding house with a bit of disappointment on her face. At this point, it's clear that she is also attracted to Tony. One day, Tony returns to Jane's boarding house, and he takes her to the Chinese district. Moments later, they enter a house owned by Tony. Inside, he tells her that it is a bachelor's house, and it's a place that Chinese men take their mistresses. Jane knows why he brought her there, and isn't bothered by it. Tony wants to have sex with her, but is scared of falling for her. Overcome by fear, he suggests they leave, but Jane stops him. She says that it's alright being his mistress, and shows that she also wants him. Tony undresses her, and brings her to the bed. Knowing that she's younger than him, Tony feels shame and hesitates. Tired of his white knight behavior, Jane takes the initiative and undresses the man. The two then engage in hours of passionate lovemaking while ignoring the outside world. Later that night, Jane talks about her dream of becoming a writer. She wants to write about her life and her family. She shares with him the financial challenges her family faces. Tony discloses his awareness of Jane's familial circumstances, including Pierre's opium issue. Questioning her intentions, he inquires if she's after wealth. Jane asserts that her affection for him, not money, motivated her visit. Following a day immersed in intimacy, they depart from the house. Tony treats Jane to dinner at a lavish Chinese eatery, where Jane unfortunately let slip a prejudiced comment about Chinese individuals. During dinner, Jane recalls her mother saying that women that pop their cherries can no longer find a husband. So she asks him if the Chinese marry women that aren't Mother Mary. He answers Jane that his culture forbids him to do that. He then says that he can no longer marry because of this. She laughs and says that she has no interest in Chinese men anyway. Moments later their bill arrives and Tony takes out his wallet to pay. Astonished to see that much money for the first time, Jane can't help but glance at Tony's fat wallet. Seeing her face, Tony smiles at Jane. Later that night, Jane sheds tears knowing she can't marry Tony. Jane and Tony frequently meet during the holidays after that fateful day. The man would send his driver to the school to pick her up and bring her to him. The lustful thirst they have for one another only grows stronger with each visit. During their dinner one night, Tony reveals that he's bound to an arranged marriage with a daughter of a wealthy Chinese businessman. Jane asks Tony if he loves the woman, and he answers no. He's never even laid eyes on her. So where does this love stem from? She feigns indifference to the whispers. Acknowledging their relationship has no future, they opt for a nonchalant connection. Jane confides in a friend about Tony, revealing that his expertise in romance is what draws her to him. This allure leads her to visit him more, even during weekday evenings. On one occasion, Tony's vehicle is seen dropping Jane off for her holidays, prompting her mother's curiosity. That night, under her mother's questioning gaze, Jane spins a tale, attributing the car to a wealthy acquaintance recently returned from Paris. Her mother shows a letter from the boarding house. It says Jane often spends nights outside the boarding house. She gives an excuse, but Pierre says it's a lie and believes Tony and Jane give each other sensual massages. She then encourages their mother to punish Jane. Confused, her mother says nothing, and after vacation is over, the entire family meets with Tony. Tony brings Jane's family to an expensive restaurant. He treats them politely and talks with them. Unfortunately, they don't pay him any attention and only focus on eating the expensive food. Fearing her family will learn she loves him, Jane ignores Tony. She tries to show her family that Tony is nothing more than a wealthy friend. Moments later, Pierre demands going to La Cascade for dancing and drinking. Tony pays the bill and accommodates Peter's demands. Jane's family is rude towards Tony, even if he treats them with respect and generosity. Not willing to shame himself, he keeps a cool head. Moments later, his eyes get teary after realizing they only want money. Now, I ain't saying she's a gold digger, but she ain't messing with no broke. Later that night, Tony brings Jane to his bachelor's house. She is silent, even after how badly her family treated their host. Tony then approaches her and silently looks into her eyes. Suddenly, he slaps her hard and rips her panties when she falls in the bed. Overwhelmed by frustration, Tony's behavior shifts, reflecting a sense of feeling exploited, not unlike how he perceives her family's financial expectations. Jane remains passive and detached throughout their interaction. Post-encounter, she adopts a guise of materialism, requesting additional funds. In response, Tony extracts money from his wallet, placing it on the table, then sits back, consumed by a mix of frustration and distress. The next day, Jane gives her mother her hard-earned money. The mother then talks with the head of the boarding house and asks her to let Jane leave when she wants to. She really just letting her daughter sell herself. Okay. Jane meets with Tony later. She reveals that everyone in school knows about their relationship. She adds that no one talks to her now and they treat her as an outcast. One night, Tony asks Jane when she's returning to France. She replies that she'll go once the school year is over. She also says that she might not come back because of her family's financial issues. Since he still loves her, Tony gives Jane his mother's ring. Tony visits his father the next day and tells him about Jane. He then asks to marry her, but his father denies his request. He learns that he'll lose his wealth if he doesn't choose the girl arranged for him. Tony tells Jane everything later that day. He tells her that he's nothing without his father's wealth. Despite how much he loves her, he can't be with her. Jane urges him to wed another, as her heart does not belong to him. She unfolds their tale of descending into poverty, rooted in her mother's unfortunate investment misadventures. Later, Jane seeks solitude in a nearby hut, reflecting on her mother's financial tribulations, suspecting an ill-fated venture into Beconic. Indeed, the couple shares one final night. In those intimate hours, Tony implores Jane to confess that her presence is solely for the allure of his wealth. Jane repeats his words and says she doesn't love him. Jane tries to have sex with him one last time, but he stops her. He says that he can't make love to her since she doesn't love him in the first place. It was his way of making the separation less painful for them. Jane returns home the next day. Her mother and Pierre see the ring on her finger. They can't understand why Tony would give her an expensive item. Jane throws the ring to avoid further suspicion. She even tells them to sell it because she doesn't care. Pierre suspects his sister slept with Tony, so he smells her undergarments. He says it smells like Panda Express. Pierre beats up his sister for sleeping with a Chinese man. Paul only listens and cries because he's too scared of Pierre to act. Several days later, Pierre is sent back home to France by his mother. The departure of Pierre deeply saddens their mother, as he holds a special place in her heart. It's perplexing and disheartening to witness Pierre's insensitive gesture of narrowing his eyes with his fingers, a clear act of disrespect. Such actions cast a shadow over his character. The mother's sorrow is palpable, feeling the absence of her son acutely. Months down the line, Jane makes her way to Tony's abode, now a bachelor's retreat. There, she discovers that he has succumbed to a haze of alcohol and opium, a desperate attempt to erase the memories of her. He discloses his impending wedding, set to occur in mere days. As Tony's wedding day unfolds, he catches a glimpse of Jane among the onlookers. Their gazes lock momentarily before Tony diverts his eyes. Upon Jane's return home, she discovers her mother orchestrating a move back to France, their belongings already sold. Her mother then unveils a shocking revelation. Tony has financed their return journey and even cleared Pierre's opium-related debts. Jane, seeking closure, or perhaps a final goodbye, heads to Tony's bachelor dwelling, only to find it empty. She waits all day, but he never appears. Jane leaves the bachelor's house and goes home. Several days later, Jane and her family board a ship for France. As the ship sails away from the port, she sees Tony's car. Jane watches the car as she slowly drifts further away from her lover. That night, she cries her heart out as she accepts that she'll no longer see Tony. Years pass, and Jane has aged. She has achieved her goal of becoming a writer. One day she receives a call from Tony and learns that he still loves her. After all those years, they haven't forgotten about each other, and their love still lives. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.